The prison loomed like a forgotten fortress on the edge of the city, its walls weathered with decades of secrets, the iron gates creaking like an old man's bones each time they opened to swallow another soul. And inside those walls walked Warden Alina Hayes, a woman in her early 40s with a sharp jawline and eyes that never softened in front of the guards. Yet beneath her iron mask she carried exhaustion like an unspoken weight. On that cold November morning, she made her usual rounds through the dim-lit corridors of Blackthorn Penitentiary, the fluorescent lights flickering above as though the building itself resisted revealing too much, her polished shoes echoing against concrete, until she paused outside cell block D, the block reserved for the most manipulative offenders, where a low murmur of voices slipped through the bars like whispers from another world. And among them was inmate Marcus Kane, a man serving a 20-year sentence for aggravated assault and armed robbery. Notorious for his unsettling calmness, his presence magnetic enough to make even hardened guards uneasy. "Morning, Warden," Marcus called out with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes, his voice smooth and deliberate, and Alina, though she gave no response, felt the weight of his stare follow her steps, a stare that seemed less like admiration and more like a chess player calculating his next move. Over time, Marcus had become the ghost in her thoughts, his charm creeping in where rules and discipline should have fortified her. And though she would never admit it aloud, she often lingered a second too long outside his cell, her professional composure cracking in ways she could not fully control, because beneath the hardened surface of her authority was loneliness, sharpened by a crumbling marriage that left her nights empty and her days mechanical. That night, after finishing paperwork in her dim office, she caught herself replaying Marcus's voice in her head, the way he leaned against the bars with an ease that suggested patience, the kind of patience a predator has when waiting for prey to step close enough. And in that moment she realized with quiet horror that she was no longer just monitoring him. She was drawn to him, as if he had found the one fracture in her armor and tapped it like a skilled violinist plucking a perfect note. The storm outside rattled the window panes, the rain streaking like tears down the glass, and she muttered to herself, "Don't be stupid, Alina. He's an inmate, a liar, a manipulator." But the line between warning and temptation blurred every time his eyes met hers. And somewhere in that dangerous blur, something irreversible was beginning to take shape. The prison at night became its own character, howling pipes, groaning locks, shadows stretching across walls like the hands of unseen figures, and in that atmosphere of paranoia and secrets, the seeds of an affair darker than she could imagine were quietly planted, their roots spreading silently, waiting to grow into something lethal. Alina didn't yet know it, but this wasn't a game of attraction, one that would bind her fate to Marcus Kane forever, pulling her into a narrative of betrayal, disease, and murder, a story that even the thickest prison walls would not be able to contain. The following week unfolded with a quiet dread that Alina could not name, her days filled with paperwork, staff briefings, and disciplinary reports. But beneath the surface of every task lurked the echo of Marcus's voice, his words stretching across the steel and concrete like threads, trying to weave her into his world. And one late afternoon, As the sun dipped low and painted the cell block in a rust-colored glow, she caught him leaning against the bars with a look that was neither hostile nor submissive, but disarmingly human, the kind of look that seemed to pierce through her uniform, her authority, and every layer she had built to survive in a man's profession. "Rough day, Warden?" he asked casually, his tone low enough so that the nearby guard couldn't catch the words. And though she should have ignored him, she found herself replying with a clipped, "Every day here is rough," her voice betraying more weariness than intended, which earned her a faint smile from Marcus, as though he had just won the first point in a dangerous game. Nights grew longer, colder, and lonelier, and soon she began lingering after hours, walking corridors that buzzed with a silence so heavy it pressed on her chest, until eventually she found herself at his cell with no one else around, the dim light throwing shadows across his face, making his features sharper, hungrier. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, more to herself than to him, but Marcus leaned closer to the bars, his words dripping with calculated tenderness. "Maybe I'm exactly where you need me to be," and in that instant her pulse betrayed her, pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She told herself it was just curiosity, that her marriage's collapse and the years of solitude had left her vulnerable to any attention. But deep down she recognized the truth that she was allowing herself to stand at the edge of a cliff, toes curled over, staring into the void, daring gravity to take her. The prison walls hummed with secrets that night, every clang of metal, every echo of footsteps, a reminder that she was risking not only her career but her freedom. And yet when Marcus slid a folded scrap of paper between the bars, a note scribbled with nothing more than "Meet me in the laundry room, midnight," she took it, her hand trembling as though she were accepting a weapon, not a message. The hours until midnight dragged like chains, every second filled with the suffocating awareness that she should burn the note, forget the invitation. Yet when the time came, she found herself unlocking doors she had no business unlocking, her breath hitching with each turn of the key, until finally she slipped into the humid, dim-lit laundry room where steam rose from idle machines and shadows played tricks against the peeling walls. Marcus was already there, somehow moving through the prison like a phantom, and when their eyes met, something irreversible passed between them, a spark that was less romance and more ignition, setting fire to boundaries that had held for years. "You came," he murmured, his voice almost triumphant. And though Alina wanted to say she would leave immediately, that this was insanity, her feet remained planted, her body betraying her reason, her heart pounding in a rhythm that whispered of danger and desire. The first touch was accidental, his fingers brushing hers as though testing the current, and the jolt that ran through her made her realize she was no longer in control. Marcus was, and he knew it. Every movement, every word, every silence designed to ensnare her deeper, pulling her further into the kind of darkness that could never remain hidden. The first secret meeting in the laundry room marked the beginning of a descent. Alina Hayes could neither resist nor control, and though she promised herself it would never happen again, she found her feet betraying her days later, carrying her back into the shadows, where Marcus waited with the same calm grin, as if he had known she would return all along, his eyes glowing with the quiet triumph of a hunter who has already set the trap. The prison corridors by day buzzed with the rhythm of clanging gates, barking orders, and the metallic scent of disinfectant. But by night they became hollow arteries of silence, pulsing with the danger of footsteps that should not echo there. And in that silence, Alina found herself whispering words she never thought would escape her mouth. "If anyone finds out, I'll lose everything," to which Marcus replied softly, his voice like smoke curling in her ear. "No one has to know, unless you want them to." A phrase that chilled her spine, though she forced herself to ignore the implication. Each encounter grew bolder, evolving from stolen words at midnight to hurried touches against cold walls. 2 moments where her breath caught in his hand and her heart hammered like it might explode. And though her conscience screamed louder with each risk, the isolation of her life, the crumbling facade of her marriage, and the intoxicating power of being desired by someone so dangerous blurred her resolve. She told herself it was passion, but in truth it was submission. A slow surrender to a man who studied her weaknesses like a map, tracing every insecurity and longing until he found the keys that unlocked her. "You're not like the others," Marcus would murmur. "You see me." And though part of her knew he had spoken the same rehearsed lines to countless women in his past, another part ached to believe him, clinging to the illusion that she was special, different, chosen. Yet paranoia clawed at her every waking hour, guards' eyes lingering too long, colleagues asking casual questions that felt like interrogation, the echo of her own husband's voice on voicemail reminding her she was still tethered to a life outside these walls, a life she was dismantling brick by brick. One night, after slipping back to her office, with Marcus's scent still clinging to her skin, she stared into the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back, her lipstick smeared, her hair disheveled, her eyes hollow yet burning, and whispered hoarsely, "What are you doing, Alina?" But no answer came, only the buzzing of the fluorescent light overhead like a mocking reminder of the line she had crossed. Marcus, meanwhile, began pushing boundaries of his own, asking her for favors: an extra blanket, access to contraband, whispered promises that if she loved him she would help him survive this place end, though at first she resisted, telling herself she would never abuse her authority. She soon found herself rationalizing small transgressions, each one a stepping stone toward corruption. "It's just a cigarette," she told herself one evening as she slid the item into his palm. But the flicker of triumph in his eyes told her it was far more than that. It was proof that he owned a piece of her now, proof that she was willing to compromise everything for him. In the prison yard, guards gossiped in hushed tones about rumors of staff bending to inmates' will. And though Alina kept her mask fixed, every word felt like a knife pressed against her throat. For she knew that once suspicion truly bloomed, there would be no going back. What she didn't realize, not yet, was that Marcus's game had a far deadlier layer beneath it. One that would transform their illicit affair from a forbidden secret into a ticking time bomb, set to explode with consequences she could never imagine. The tension between Alina and Marcus deepened like a wound that refused to close. And by the time winter draped its icy hand over Blackthorn Penitentiary, their affair had become a ritual hidden in shadows, carried out in empty storerooms, abandoned corridors, and the blind spots of security cameras she had once demanded be fixed, but now silently thanked for their negligence. Her professional mask by day was flawless. She barked orders, signed forms, and presided over disciplinary hearings with a cold detachment, but by night her body betrayed her, aching for the illicit touch that only Marcus offered. And with each stolen hour she slipped further from the woman she once believed herself to be. Yet a gnawing dread chewed at her bones, growing stronger after every encounter, until one evening, as the storm raged outside and the prison shuddered beneath the wind, Marcus whispered something that turned her blood to ice. "You trust me, don't you, Alina?" And though she forced herself to answer yes with a shaky conviction, the way his lips curved into a smile told her the question wasn't about affection, but power. A power he now wielded like a blade pressed against her throat. The paranoia worsened after that. She imagined guards glancing too long, inmates snickering under their breath, administrators noticing the unusual hours logged in her reports, and every shadow felt like an accusation, every whisper like the hiss of discovery. One night she stumbled upon Marcus pacing his cell, muttering to himself, and when she asked what troubled him, he turned with a look so hollow it frightened her, confessing in a low rasp, "They left me here to rot, and nobody cares what happens to me, except you," before stepping closer to the bars, his fingers brushing hers, his voice dripping with venomous intimacy. "That's why you'll never leave me, because I carry a piece of me inside you now." Words she dismissed as a manipulative metaphor, but which lingered in her mind like a parasite, festering until it woke her from sleep in a sweat. A week later, when she noticed his persistent cough, the pallor in his skin, the strange secrecy of his medical files she had once glimpsed on a nurse's clipboard, a seed of horror rooted itself in her chest, one that bloomed into full terror when Marcus finally cornered her in the laundry room again, pulling her close until his breath warmed her ear, and he whispered, almost gleefully, "You should know something, Warden. I'm HIV positive." A confession delivered not with shame, but with triumph, as though this was the checkmate move he had been waiting for all along. She froze, every muscle in her body screaming denial, her voice breaking as she whispered, "You're lying," but the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes told her otherwise. And suddenly every touch, every kiss, every reckless moment played through her mind like a reel of self-destruction, each one binding her to a fate she could no longer escape. "You belong to me now," he added, his tone dark and possessive, "because no one else will ever want you after this." And in that moment Alina felt the walls close in, tighter than ever before. The prison no longer just her workplace, but her personal cage. Each barred window, a reminder that she was trapped not by her title or her duty, but by a man she should have kept locked away. A man who had infected her not just with a disease, but with a destiny that would soon spiral into blood and betrayal. The days that followed Marcus's chilling confession felt like living inside a nightmare with no waking escape. Alina drifting through her duties like a ghost, her once commanding voice cracking with hesitation, her eyes darting to every shadow as though the walls themselves had begun whispering her sins. She couldn't shake his words, "I'm HIV positive. You belong to me now," and though she wanted to dismiss them as a cruel manipulation, the memories of his pallid skin, the cough that rattled his chest, and the way the infirmary nurse had glanced too quickly at his chart confirmed the truth in ways she could no longer deny. And at night, she stared into her bathroom mirror until dawn, touching her lips as if the disease itself might reveal its presence in the reflection, whispering broken prayers into the silence of her empty house. Paranoia became her constant shadow, and with it came Marcus's tightening grip. His letters slid into her hand during rounds, notes folded into her office files, words scrawled with a confidence that dared her to destroy them. "We are bound forever now. Don't even think about leaving me." And though every instinct screamed to report him, to drag him before the disciplinary board, she knew the exposure of their affair would ruin her, stripping her of her career, her freedom, and the reputation she had spent decades building. Worse still was the fear that he might be right, that something irreversible already coursed through her veins, shackling her to him in the most grotesque form of intimacy imaginable. One evening she confronted him in his cell, her voice trembling as she demanded, "Why me? Why would you do this?" And Marcus only smiled, his eyes glowing with cruel serenity as he replied, "Because you thought you were in control. But the truth is, Alina, control has always belonged to me." Words that hollowed her chest like a blade twisting inside. The prison's corridors seemed narrower after that, the guards' gazes sharper, and Alina found herself snapping at her staff, her composure fraying in ways that did not go unnoticed. Whispers circulating about her strange behavior. Whispers that made her skin crawl with the certainty that discovery loomed closer each day. Her husband called less frequently now, his voice colder with every unanswered message, until one night she deleted them all in a fit of rage, her personal life collapsing into ashes even as her professional one teetered on the brink. But beneath the despair burned something else, a seed of fury that grew with every smirk Marcus threw her way, every whispered reminder of the leash he claimed to hold, until she realized with clarity that terrified Hershey didn't just hate him. She wanted him gone, erased, silenced forever. Standing in her office late one night, the rain hammering against the window, she caught her own reflection staring back at her with hollow eyes and clenched jaw, and whispered to the glass, "Maybe there's only one way out," the thought chilling her, yet filling her with a grim resolve. For if Marcus had written her fate in blood and sickness, then she would be the one to end the story, even if it meant crossing the line from keeper of order to dealer of death. Outside her office, the prison moaned and groaned like a beast hungry for secrets, and somewhere deep within its belly, Marcus Kane smiled in his cell, unaware that the prey he thought he had trapped was already sharpening the knife that would turn the hunter into the hunted. Elena's decision took root in silence, a poisonous resolve she carried like contraband through every hallway of Blackthorn Penitentiary, her expression cold enough to mask the storm brewing inside. But beneath that exterior, her mind moved with deadly precision, rehearsing possibilities the way other wardens rehearsed safety drills. She began watching Marcus not as a lover, nor as a victim of her weakness, but as prey, tracking his routines with clinical detachment, the hours he was taken to the yard, the times guards grew lax during night rotations, the moments he leaned too close to whisper threats through the bars, mistaking her silence for submission. Every interaction became a rehearsal for murder, her fingers brushing the keys at her belt, not as symbols of authority, but as instruments of opportunity. And yet, with each step toward planning his death, her conscience clawed at her, whispering that this wasn't justice, this was vengeance. And vengeance was a language she had sworn to silence when she first donned the uniform. Still, Marcus made the choice clearer with each passing day, his notes growing darker, his words twisting deeper. "You'll never escape me, Alina." Were one body now, until the weight of them pressed on her chest like a coffin lid, leaving her gasping at night, drenched in sweat, her mind flashing with images of his smirk carved permanently into her nightmares. One evening, she wandered into the prison's supply closet under the guise of an inspection, her eyes falling on a heavy wrench left forgotten on a shelf, her fingers hovering above it as though testing the gravity of fate. And though she walked away empty, she carried the phantom weight of it all the way back to her office, the idea embedding itself like a nail in her skull. Yet opportunity in Blackthorn was fickle, and every night she waited for the right moment only deepened her paranoia, each creak of the floorboards sounding like footsteps, each clink of keys outside her door like chains tightening, until the lines between fear and fury blurred completely. During one of their late-night encounters, Marcus reached through the bars, his hand brushing her cheek as he murmured, "You'd never hurt me, Alina. You love me." And though she forced herself to remain still, inside she recoiled, her stomach twisting with disgust so violent it nearly drove her to strike him then and there. But she knew patience was her only weapon now, patience and silence, the same tools he had used to lure her into his web. In the weeks that followed, she began laying subtle groundwork, switching guard schedules under the pretense of efficiency, ensuring certain cameras remained under maintenance, and most crucially, keeping Marcus convinced she was still under his spell, answering his manipulations with feigned tenderness, allowing him to believe he was untouchable, while in truth she was constructing a cage inside a cage, a place where he would be alone with her when the time came. Yet every night, as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, she felt the pull of two opposing truths, one where she confessed everything, resigned and faced the ruin of her career and life, and another where she crossed the threshold of blood, severing Marcus's hold in the only way left to her. The storm of her thoughts built until it became unbearable, until the air around her seemed charged with inevitability, and one night, standing at the edge of the cell block with her keys in her hand, she whispered under her breath, "It ends with me or him." And for the first time since the nightmare began, she felt a clarity that chilled her bones. There was no turning back. The plan unfurled in Elena's mind with the cold precision of a blueprint drafted in blood, each detail etched with the kind of clarity born only from desperation. And though her hand shook whenever she imagined the act itself, she forced herself to focus on logistics, the small, invisible manipulations that would make Marcus vulnerable without raising suspicion. She started by studying guard rotations, noting the cracks where exhaustion made men careless, the dead zones in the surveillance system she had once demanded be repaired but now prayed would stay broken. And slowly, she began shifting schedules under the guise of efficiency, creating gaps that no one questioned but which she knew would leave Marcus alone, unprotected in her reach. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed intoxicated by his own control, growing bolder in his taunt, slipping notes that read, "You'll never leave me," into her files, whispering through the bars, "I see the way you look at me, Alina. terrified but addicted, and though she responded with the occasional smile or soft word, her thoughts were no longer bound by fear or lust, but by calculation. Every moment with him becoming a rehearsal for the night she would strike. One evening in her office, rain rattling the window like skeletal fingers, she opened a locked drawer and stared at a sharpened shank confiscated months earlier. Its handle wrapped in cloth, its blade jagged with menace. And though she had sworn never to allow such weapons back into circulation, her trembling hand closed around it, the weight both foreign and inevitable in her grip. Her reflection in the glass whispering back at her, "This is survival, not murder." Yet doubt still gnawed, and in the quiet of her home she vomited from the guilt, shaking as though her body itself rejected the path her mind had chosen. But every morning when she returned to Blackthorn and felt Marcus's stare pierce through the bars, mocking, possessive, eternal, her resolve, hardened like cement, poured into her veins. The opportunity arrived on a storm-lashed night when half the prison's power flickered out. Cameras stuttering into static, guards distracted with restless inmates, and as chaos rippled through the block, Alina felt the moment click into place. The silence inside her chest replaced with a thundering clarity. This was the night. She moved like a shadow, her keys silent in her hand, the shank wrapped in cloth beneath her uniform, her pulse a drumbeat guiding her through the darkened corridors until she reached the cell where Marcus stood waiting, as though he had known she would come. "You couldn't stay away," he murmured with a grin that carved into her nerves. But this time Elena's face did not betray the turmoil inside, her voice steady as she whispered, "You were right. It was always going to end this way." Words that flickered confusion across his expression just long enough for her to step closer, for the storm outside to mask the metallic whisper of the weapon sliding free, for the predator to finally see that the prey had teeth. And though her hand trembled as she raised the blade, her eyes locked on his, and for the first time she felt not fear, not desire, but a terrifying calm, the calm of someone standing at the edge of damnation, ready to leap. The storm outside hammered the prison with violent fists of rain, lightning flaring just long enough to bleach the concrete corridors in stark white before plunging them back into shadow. And in that flickering chaos, Alina unlocked Marcus's cell, her hand trembling so violently the keys rattled like bones. Yet her resolve held, her mind a tunnel, focused only on the figure before her. Marcus stepped back slowly, his grin fading into wary curiosity, his eyes narrowing as though he sensed the shift in her energy. And for a heartbeat they stood in silence, predator and prey staring at one another while the air between them thickened with inevitability. "What's this?" he asked softly, his tone losing its smugness, his voice dipping into the uncertainty of a man who realized too late that he had underestimated the depth of her desperation. But Alina said nothing, her hand tightening around the cloth-wrapped shank as she stepped inside, the door clanging shut behind her with the finality of a coffin lid. Her pulse roared in her ears, louder than the thunder outside, louder than his sudden nervous laugh, and when Marcus reached out, as if to touch her cheek again, she flinched back with a hiss, her voice cracking like glass. "Don't you dare," before thrusting forward in a blur of movement, the blade sinking into flesh with a sickening resistance that jolted up her arm. His scream tore through the storm, echoing down the cell block. But the prison was already alive with chaos from the blackout. The pounding of fists against metal drowning his cries, and Elena, shaking, driven by a frenzy she had never known, struck again, the blade carving through years of fear and shame. Each plunge a desperate attempt to sever the bond he had poisoned her with. Marcus staggered, his hands clawing at her, his blood spraying against the concrete walls in violent arcs, his voice gurgling between coughs of crimson. You'll never be free, before collapsing to his knees, his eyes burning with both rage and twisted admiration, as though even in death he relished that he had dragged her into his darkness. Elena stumbled back, her chest heaving, her hands trembling and slick with blood, staring at the man sprawled before her, the man who had infected her, controlled her, destroyed her, and yet in this final moment looked almost small, almost human, the predator reduced to nothing more than a broken body on the floor. She dropped the shank, its clang piercing the air like a gunshot, and for a moment she thought of screaming, of calling for help, of fabricating some story about self-defense. But the truth weighed on her heavier than the storm itself. She had crossed the line, abandoned the law she swore to uphold, and in doing so she had become the very kind of criminal she once locked away. Footsteps echoed faintly down the block, distant but growing closer, and panic surged through her veins as she realized the scene was unraveling too quickly, the blood spreading across the floor like a confession, impossible to hide. And with a hollow whisper to herself, "It's done. It's finally done," Elena turned toward the shadows, her mind scrambling for escape, her heart hammering with the dawning terror that killing Marcus Kane was not the end of her nightmare but the beginning of something far darker, a reckoning that would consume her life forever. The prison reeked of iron and thunder. The morning after Marcus Kane's blood pooled across the concrete, the storm's fury replaced by an eerie calm that felt less like relief and more like the world holding its breath, waiting for the truth to unravel. Elena sat in her office with her uniform freshly pressed, her hair neatly tied, her hands folded so tightly on the desk her knuckles shone white. Yet beneath the polished exterior, her mind was a battlefield. Every sound in the corridor outside echoing like the boots of executioners marching closer. Every knock at the door making her stomach twist with dread. When the guards discovered Marcus's body at dawn, the prison erupted into chaos. Sirens blared, radios crackled, and inmates banged against their doors in frenzied rhythm, chanting his name like a battle cry. And though Elena had rushed to the scene, feigning shock, feigning horror, the weight of his blood still clung invisibly to her skin, a stain no soap could wash away. "Warden Hayes, you need to see this," a lieutenant had barked, leading her through the crowd of officers as though she were another spectator rather than the orchestrator. And when she looked down at Marcus's lifeless body, his eyes frozen wide in that last twisted mixture of rage and admiration, she forced tears into her voice as she whispered, "My God, who could have done this?" A performance so convincing even she almost believed it. But suspicions spread quickly in an environment built on paranoia, and the investigative unit arrived before nightfall. Men in dark suits walking the corridors like vultures circling a carcass, their questions sharp, their stares sharper. "Warden Hayes," one agent said, his tone clipped. "We understand you were last to make rounds on Block D. Last night, did you notice anything unusual?" And though she answered with practiced calm, her pulse betrayed her, thundering beneath her ribs as though begging to be heard, and every word felt like it might fracture, spilling the truth like blood across the floor. Inmates whispered behind their bars, rumors spreading like wildfire. Some claiming Marcus had enemies among the gangs, others insisting staff had finally snapped under his manipulation. But threaded through the noise was a quieter suspicion, one that made Elena's skin crawl. The warden was too close to him. Her colleagues glanced at her with subtle wariness now, the kind reserved for those who might be hiding more than they showed. And when she caught her own reflection in a window, woman calm on the surface but hollow-eyed beneath, she realized the mask she wore was already cracking. Nights grew unbearable, Marcus's voice haunting her dreams, whispering from the shadows of her mind, "You'll never be free, Elena. I'm still inside you." And she woke, gasping, clawing at her skin, as though the infection itself had risen to the surface. Yet, amid the fear, a darker instinct flickered. A thought that if she maintained control, if she kept her lies airtight, perhaps she could survive the investigation. Perhaps she could bury Marcus Kane a second time, not just his body, but his hold over her life. Still, the prison itself seemed to turn against her. Doors creaking like accusations, radios crackling her name in hushed tones. And as she walked the corridors, she felt less like a warden and more like an inmate awaiting sentencing. Her fate no longer her own, but dangling on the fragile thread of deception. A thread that could snap with a single question asked at the wrong time, by the wrong person, in the wrong place. The walls of Blackthorn seemed to close tighter with each passing day, the investigation carving through the prison like a scalpel, peeling back layers of lies and secrets, until Elena felt her own skin raw beneath the scrutiny, her mask cracking every time an investigator's question lingered too long on her, every time a colleague's gaze narrowed with suspicion. She had thought killing Marcus would sever his hold, but his presence lingered like smoke in every corner of her life. His blood still stained her dreams. His voice still slithered in her ear when she walked the corridors alone, whispering, "You're mine forever, Elena. You'll never bury me." And the disease he had left inside her pulsed like a ticking clock, a reminder that no matter how well she concealed the murder, his corruption lived on in her body. Late one night, she sat alone in her office, the blinds drawn, the desk lamp spilling a cone of weak light across the scattered files, her reflection fractured in the glass of a half-empty whiskey bottle, and she realized with a cold clarity that the real prison was no longer made of concrete and steel, but of secrets and guilt, bars she had forged with her own hands. When investigators finally called her in for formal questioning, the room felt like a courtroom cloaked in fluorescent light, their voices sharp, their notepads scratching like claws. "Where were you between 11 and 1 the night Marcus Kane was killed?" And though she answered with measured calm, every word felt like a stone stacked onto a crumbling wall. And deep inside, she knew one wrong syllable would send it all crashing down. Yet fate had its own cruelty. For a while they could not yet prove her presence in his cell. Whispers of her closeness to Marcus, the late nights, the altered schedules, began to swirl into something undeniable. And she caught fragments in the hallway guards, muttering she was always around him. Too much, inmates sneering, wardens dirty, just like him, until the prison itself seemed to testify against her. Her marriage finally shattered when her husband arrived one evening, eyes cold, voice trembling with disgust, tossing a stack of photographs across her desk, images of her lingering outside Marcus's cell. Blurred but damning enough, and without another word he walked away, leaving her to collapse into her chair, staring at the evidence of her own undoing. The night after, when the storm returned to thrash against the prison walls, Alina walked the empty corridors alone, her footsteps echoing like the toll of a bell, her body heavy with the weight of every choice that had led her here. And for the first time she allowed herself to whisper the truth aloud, her voice breaking as she said to the shadows, "I killed Marcus Kane." Whether anyone heard didn't matter, for the confession itself shattered something inside her, and she sank against the bars, trembling. No longer Warden Hayes, but just another prisoner of Blackthorn, condemned by her own hand. By dawn she sat in her office, awaiting the inevitable knock, the folder of forged reports and false alibis unopened on her desk, her hands folded neatly as though preparing for trial. And when the investigators finally entered, their faces grim, their voices steady, as they told her she was being placed under suspension pending further inquiry, she nodded with eerie calm, rising slowly, the weight of inevitability settling like chains around her shoulders. As they led her past the cell blocks, the inmates howled with laughter, banging their fists in cruel rhythm, chanting her name the way they once had Marcus's. And in that cacophony she understood the final irony. She had traded her throne for a cage, her authority for infamy, her freedom for a secret love affair turned fatal. And as the gates of Blackthorn clanged shut behind her, the storm still raging above, Alina Hayes realized the story of Marcus Kane did not end with his death, but with her own downfall. Her legacy forever rewritten, not as the woman who ruled the prison, but as the warden who became its prisoner.